So, you want to be a real estate investor, but where do you start? How do you know what information and sources to trust? That's where I come in. I'm Jonny Cattani, and this is the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. Hey guys, real quick, before we start, go to investwithcattani.com and download my free ebook, Is Commercial Real Estate Recession Proof? Now to today's show. What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Jonny Cattani, and I'm joined today by Dylan Marma. Dylan is the principal of the Equity Group, a vertically integrated real estate private equity company. He's been investing full-time for the last 4 years and has been the lead sponsor of over $100 million in transactions, including over 750 multifamily apartments and 1,200 lots of manufactured housing communities and RV campgrounds. Dylan is a firm believer that through careful deal selection, attracting exceptional people, and utilizing technology-backed systems, you can ensure above-average risk-adjusted returns through real estate. Dylan, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Happy to have you. Lot to cover today. Really excited. Like we were talking offline. Haven't covered this asset class too much, so looking forward to your insight. But let's back up a little bit all the way to the beginning, like we do with all of our guests. And, how did you get into all of this and where did you start?
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up in upstate New York, and when I was 20 years old, I made the, less common decision to leave school and pursue sort of what I envisioned at the time as being a lifestyle by design. Really caught the real estate bug as I saw it being a great sort of risk-adjusted way to, or path to pursue. And I went out and moved to sunny San Diego at the time, found a job with a real estate investing and education company, worked there for 3 years, started learning as much as I could, started to buy some turnkey rentals, and then caught the bug for syndications. And at the time, I was mainly focused on multifamily. Went all in for several years on multifamily syndication. Went full time into that, and worked on about 800 doors over the course of 3 or so years, through as a lead sponsor, as well as through some joint ventures. And then after, right up until, I guess that brings me right up until COVID, hit. And then I actually parted ways with my partners at that time, started a new company under the Equity Group, and I really caught the bug for the manufactured housing community space, mobile home parks, and that led into RV parks, and that's what we've mainly been focused on since then. So over the last 18 or so months, we've acquired over 1,200 sites, and we have another 500 plus under contract. So we've been growing quite rapidly, but really loving the space. We've got a completely vertically integrated team. So we do everything between, capital raising on the investor relations show. We also do all of our property management in-house. Then we have acquisitions in-house, a lot of cold calling direct to sellers, things like that. So definitely worn most of the hats at this point. And that's where we are.
Awesome. I love it. What a great story. Can definitely relate there in the beginning. I also dropped out of college. In hindsight, I was right. And, my parents thought I was crazy, but it took a while for them to understand what I was pursuing. But here we are. So awesome. So like I said, not an asset class we talk too much about, especially kind of on the RV site. Now, the 1,200 lots, that's like 1,200 pads, right? That house or RV can go on. Awesome. And that has taken off lately in terms of more investors, putting capital towards that asset class. Is it still, you mentioned direct to sellers. Are there still a lot of mom and pops and kind of, places that are kind of flying under the radar that you're reaching out to?
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, I think it might sound like it's taken off, but this is the Wild West. I mean, this is where mobile home parks were 5 plus years ago, right? I mean, it's definitely like the on market stuff is getting a little bit more attention. You see more people posting about it on social media, but I think maybe for the amount of noise that is generated out there, the actual movement in the space is not that great, right? Like I think a lot of people making noise have maybe like one or a few deals, so it's not being tapped into all that much yet, but I think I think it will be, right? I think that it's because of the noise, people start looking around, and people are all chasing yield, and for good reason. It's hard to find in today's world, right, with cap rates compressed. So I think this is an area where there's a lot of inefficient pricing going on. There's a lot of mom and pop owners, and it's a similar size like market cap to that of, say, like the self-storage industry. So if you look at what's happened there in the last decade or so, there's been a ton of cap rate compression and a lot more institutionalization, but there's still good self-storage deals available today. The biggest difference, though, with, say, like an RV campground compared to, say, a mobile home park or a self-storage, which are probably the two most popular alternative real estate asset types right now, is that it's more operationally intensive. I mean, it depends. I can go into the different types of RV campgrounds, and why it's the most misunderstood asset type, because of that. But broadly speaking, I mean, you have a hospitality component to this, which I think a lot of the folks that are generally in the self-storage or MHP space, like it's not, neither of those are really super operation intensive businesses. I'm not saying there's not value add deals that require a ton of work, because there are. We do a lot of those, but when you look at this, I mean, you're really kind of at the intersection of real estate and private equity, and there's a business component to it. So I think that it's extremely important to get the operations right. So I guess I say all that to say that it's what's unique about this is that there's the operations component, which is going to create a barrier to entry, which makes me think it's going to take longer before the space really becomes more saturated. And even when it does become saturated, I think a lot of people will get in and get out because they don't want to do the work,
Totally. Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. It's not like multifamily where lately, if you've gotten in, you could basically trip and still hit a 2x multiple on your deal,
So multifamily, just to caveat that, multifamily is a business that I think a lot of people would get in and get out, for the same reasons I just stated, except for the fact that you have third-party managers that have a ton of experience in almost every market in the entire country. So you can hire a third-party manager, right? Most of the people that are, syndicators are going out there and they're hiring a manager and they're relying on the manager to do the heavy lifting. Whereas when you get into the alternative asset classes, especially like, RV, I mean, there's really not many options on third party. It's not a profitable business for third party managers because there's not the amount of supply in every market to make it profitable. So you can't bake in all of the flying around the country and you don't have the scale that multi does to effectively have third party management being a big business.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So let's get into it. Let's kind of start at the beginning. So let's keep a high level, because I know there's a lot to touch on about it, but start at the beginning. What does, kind of finding the deal and underwriting a deal, you mentioned offline, there's a lot of variability in the underwriting. Yep. So kind of touch on that and take us through the whole process.
Yeah, certainly. So I would say that this is certainly more of an art than a science, right? But I think a lot of underwriting and modeling can be broken down to somewhat of a science these days. If you look at, clear rent comps and clear kind of historical data on expenses and things along those lines. Whereas because this has a little bit more of a business element to it, there is, an aspect of it being more of an art and, just having to be thoughtful of, what the true demand is, what the best model is for each property, things along those lines. But generally, what I guess I'll start with, to understand big picture is that there's 4 different types of RV campgrounds. And at least this is just my mental model. But this is kind of a good elementary way to start to think about, the differences. You basically have 4 types of RV campgrounds, 2 of which have more of a long-term component, and then 2 of which are more focused around short-term component. So type number 1 is your workforce campgrounds, right? Or we like to call them your extended stays. And the industry likes to occasionally call them man camps, depending on the the makeup. But these are sort of what you think about when you think about the stuff that you've seen probably on the side of the highway. That's in a major blue collar area. Maybe it's oil and gas, maybe it's energy, maybe it's got a variety of different contractor jobs, things like that. That people will, and it's again not always just man camps. You have a ton of traveling nurses. You have a ton of short-term employment. Even Amazon has something called the camper force right now, where they employ seasonally, and they will pay for the site rent for these folks that are working out of the Amazon factories. So when you look at that, these can be attractive. They usually are paying month to month, but sometimes you will see annuals in there. And a lot of times they actually pay really high rent because you have companies that are willing to cover, they have a stipend that will cover the site rent for them. So again, there's pros and cons. I think the key is diversification of your employment base and not being overly reliant on one sector or how the economy is doing. Now, transitioning into number 2 is I like to think of them as your second home locations. These are probably our favorite right now. These are usually on major bodies of water, and these are attractive destination style locations where a lot of people live within, say, 1 to 2 hour drive away from this, and they will purchase or they'll usually pay for an entire year upfront. Sometimes you can pay for a season as well. So these are usually called seasonals or annuals, depending on where in the country they are. And they often will keep their camper there all year long, just permanently. And it'll be functioning similar to how a second home would, like a lake house or something like that. And instead of having to spend 100,000 plus on a second home, you can have a $40,000, $30,000 RV that takes its place, and then you pay a fixed rate each year, and usually it's a upfront for the year, all ahead of schedule. So there's minimal collections, things like that. So very sticky long-term leases. So that's a model we like quite a bit. Then 3 and 4, you have your traditional sort of RV campground short term, where you have folks that are coming in usually within a 2-hour distance to have an outdoor destination style location, where they can gather with other folks and just experience great times with their families. Usually they stay for several days at a time, to nowadays stays are getting a little bit longer, several weeks, but these are more transient in and out. They usually do have more ancillary income streams available. Like people will pay just to lock a certain site in the campground, right? We've seen up to $100 site lock fees for the campground. Then they'll rent out golf carts for a few days. Then they'll purchase food and beverages from your campground store. And then you'll have ancillary activities like kayak rentals, or we actually have one that has a petting zoo on it. You'll have all kinds of different things for people to do while they're staying there during their short-term vacation. Then the last of the 4 is your RV resorts. And this is where you often will find sort of your Class A motor coaches, or I like to think of the spots that have the water slides and the mini kind of water parks, or things along those lines. Just really high end stuff, where it's not necessarily like an all inclusive resort, but it basically is a resort style vacation where you can go there and just have access to everything you'd want throughout the trip, all there on site.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. And you mentioned the one you like the most is the one where ideally people are paying for a year up front, leave their camper there. Makes perfect sense. Same reason I love self-storage, sticky tenants, usually going to stay with you for a long time, especially if they're paying a year up front. So, okay, awesome. So What do you have a mix of all four in your
And
portfolio?
yeah, we do. Yep.
Okay. And so I guess what are some of the differences in terms of how it's structured? So you mentioned that, there's no property management company out there. You guys had to bring it in yourself. So what does that look like for you guys in terms of, managing and operating these?
So generally on site, you'll have payroll on a per site basis that's not too different than what you have on traditional multifamily. Um, of course, you don't have nearly the same amount of maintenance that you have on traditional multifamily, but you have more of the hospitality component there. So you'll have additional folks that are on site to help with, constantly kind of cleaning this is kind of similar to maintenance, but cleaning out the bathhouses, doing the grounds. But then you'll also have people that are there to help like run events and just create great experiences. And then either on-site or off-site, you have to have someone fielding all the calls and helping with either leasing or reservations. So that's a huge piece of it. So payroll, it is a pretty people intensive business, which again adds to the operational element of it that we spoke about. And then offsite, we have we have virtual assistants that help. We have multiple regional managers. We have accounting all taking place offsite in house, and there's a lot of systems and a lot of follow up on like the core KPIs that go into it.
Okay. Makes sense. And so just so I understand, you just pay per pad, right? Essentially, that's like the main, you mentioned the ancillary things, but the main part of it, the main revenue driver is just paying for a spot or a pad essentially inside the park.
It's definitely the bulk, yeah. And you could probably name a dozen ancillary income streams that are, definitely something that come out of this. But the of course the pad rent is the bulk of your revenue.
And then is the ideal scenario here to have stuff that, like for instance, in the wintertime in Utah, you're probably not going to have a ton of people staying at your park, right? So is it, are there primary areas like, the Sun Belt where it's going to be used pretty much all year round, or
Mhm.
are you kind of, going everywhere?
Yeah, so it really varies, of course, based on how many seasons the state has. And it even varies tremendously, based on where in the Sun Belt you are, right? In North Carolina, you're going to have a much busier summer than you are in, say, Florida, right? Where Florida is going to be packed, fully occupied during the winter times, right? So it does vary tremendously based on the climate of the place that you're buying. We have so far stuck to areas where it doesn't snow, or it doesn't snow often. It might snow, 2-3 times a year. If you're in Tennessee or some of this, we have one spot in Kentucky and a bunch in North Carolina. But the it actually, I don't mind the seasonals from the stuff, the areas where it does snow though. It just, you just have to really bake that into your model up front and price it in. So I think the price per pad usually goes down because I think you usually get a little bit better rate when someone's paying year round. But I've certainly seen places like in say like Lake George, New York, where people are spending 7 or 8,000 for a 8-month season, right? And then it's kind of nice from the operation standpoint because those people get a complete break for 4 months and then they got to kick it back into gear in the beginning of the next season. So
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask next. So do some of them actually shut down? Like obviously it wouldn't make sense to have on-site manager when nobody's,
exactly, they will shut down. Yep. So and I think a nice value add can be actually keeping them open for the year if you're in kind of those borderline states, like if you're in a Tennessee or North Carolina. I mean, I've seen a lot of those campgrounds shut down completely. But if you're able to just go in and winterize the cabins and put the right infrastructure in place to support year round, I think you can actually drive up the income quite a bit just for that alone.
Makes perfect sense. So what are some of the operational components? You mentioned it's a little tricky. So what are some of the tricky things that you face that, maybe like multifamily and
Mhm.
self-storage don't have to deal with?
So one of the big things that I hear from a lot of people is that it feels like they're playing Tetris, trying to maximize their occupancy, because you get different bookings and different dates and different, size groups, and you have to try to make sure that you're, this is much, much more relevant on the short-term side, where you have to try to maximize your occupancy. Fortunately, there are softwares out there that do help with that, and they'll automate some of that for you. So that's definitely a big piece of it. Other headaches can be you need someone that's really responsive, either on site, but generally on site as the manager. You need someone that's going to be able to show up, bring good attitude, and we find answering the phone is extremely important, right? I mean, it sounds simple, but there's a lot of phone calls, people calling in looking for sites, kind of like constantly leasing. So you need to make sure you have a good system to be able to monitor those calls, making sure you're converting well there. Usually marketing is a big piece of it. We use numerous online marketing channels to do paid marketing to drive revenue. Having a good nice website, good web presence goes a really long way as well. And then outside of that, it's just really making sure that you're having regular check-ins with your people, bringing the CapEx projects to life, those sort of things.
Okay. Awesome. And then are you branding, in terms of marketing, are you branding all of yours the same so that it's one website and they can see all the different locations? Like, for instance, off the top of my head, the one I know most common is KOA, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is that something similar you guys are doing as well?
So we haven't launched the brand yet, and I can't publicly make the formal announcement yet, but we are going to be doing that.
Nice.
But right now they're all kind of individually branded. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And so a rebrand is like similar to multifamily. That's kind of an aspect. So what are some things, I guess, when you're going in and, taking one over, what are some of the maintenance things and kind of the value add components that are available, with some of these maybe under ran mom and pops?
So the easiest one is the web presence. I mean, most of the properties we look at, the websites look like they're built 20 years ago, if they have one at all. So having a web presence is huge, right? Just having a nice clean website, making sure that you're listed on all the major marketing channels, just like, apartments have a dozen different channels. There's numerous RV platforms to list your property from. In addition to that, we like Google ads a lot. There's also Facebook ads, Instagram ads, things like that, where you can, put some ad spend behind the property to be able to build brand awareness. In addition to that, having online booking. So making sure you have the right software that allows online booking. We find about 40% of bookings take place online. So if you don't have that, I think you're missing out on a lot of opportunity. Making sure that you have good staff. Again, like I said, answering the phone, being attentive, creating good, resident level experience. Those are a lot of what I consider to be the low-hanging fruit. And then there are also numerous, physical infrastructure CapEx improvements, like you would do, again, with an apartment, you'd have a interior renovation, right? With these, you'll take something that has a 30 amp electric hookup and convert it to a 50 amp so that you can now, have a broader market that can rent from that site. You also take a site that has maybe it's not paved and it's dirt, and you can upgrade it to gravel, or you upgrade it to concrete. Like concrete sites generally rent for quite a big premium versus the non-concrete sites. And the biggest play, what we like the most, is what we call expansion opportunities. So, we're looking at a property right now that has, tens of acres of just vacant land. So you have 100 or so existing sites with about 100 acres total, and we generally feel that a good number is somewhere, 8 to 10 sites per acre. So this one place we could go in with 100 sites, and 5-10 years from now, we could be looking back with 500 sites. And the incremental gain that we make on developing each site can be huge. So we're building a in-house sort of construction team to help with just lowering our costs of doing the development and expansion deals. And that's something that we definitely have our eyes on big time.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So it's similar to, as you mentioned earlier, into self-storage in that regard, where, just they're not utilizing the space like they could be, stuff hasn't been updated and since they built it basically, because ultimately, in this case, you're talking about potentially, maybe some gravel or some concrete versus not, which, to some mom and pops, really the hassle of doing all of that work and all that capex is not worth the additional fee, at least in their mind.
Yeah, and they don't want to put 15 grand out of their pocket or whatever right into that back into a lot of times. A lot of times this is their sole income stream and they're living off of it. So the idea of reinvesting is not always first in their priority list. So.
Makes sense. And so what does it look like for the on-site managers in terms of, do they live there for free, and what does that role kind of look like?
So it's about 50-50 for us right now, but a lot of times they will live on site. A lot of times you'll have an apartment or some kind of housing on site that you can offer to the managers. And that's always nice because it is a pretty intensive role. A lot of times it is more than a 40-hour week role. They do work weekends. It's not a Monday through Friday job because weekends are your busiest time. So usually it's a Tuesday or Wednesday that they're getting off. And you'll have someone fill in for the time that they're off because this is, 7 days a week nonstop. And as far as it's usually you'll have one full-time manager and one full-time maintenance at a minimum. And usually they will be supplemented with what we call work campers. So work campers are folks that will work to be able to have free site rent. So it might be they have to work X number of hours per month to be able to cover their rent. And then anything over that they actually are making an income from that. But there's a lot of folks that travel the whole country that, like the idea of being able to stay in one location for X number of months at a time, and be a work camper and contribute to their local campground. So that's actually a really great resource, and something that, is like a crucial component to any of our campgrounds is that we have, work campers that fill in for the full-time staff during their off days, as well as during the busier seasons, they'll be able to step in and help us.
Interesting. Okay. That's cool. It makes perfect sense. I guess you don't think about those kinds of people who do that full time, just travel around and, kind of, I guess, probably follow the sun, so to speak, in the warmth. So awesome. So last thing I want to touch on, let's bring it, in the beginning, you mentioned you raise all your capital in-house. So let's bring it to the investor level. What's it like finding investors for this asset class and, kind of setting the expectation? And then what do returns typically look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in terms of this, being this is really I could say it's the third type of asset that I've raised capital for. So I've been able to see sort of different levels of appetite for different things. And I think with this space, it is a little bit more of the unknown. And I think investors are not as familiar with it, right? I think I always like to say, like with, you have, I think a lot of people in today's, world are kind of like influenced by the big like influencers and promoters out there. So when you have like multifamily, you have your people. I mean, multifamily is everywhere, right? So you could name a laundry list of people that are shouting about how it's, the best investment out there. So I think, as basically all LPs in the real estate industry have heard that enough times and have, know the basic principles of what goes behind multifamily. And then with MHP, I think it's similar now, right? Where you have a lot of just big names that are just talking about investing into it and things along those lines. And with RV campgrounds, I think people are still just getting familiar with what it is and how it works. I mean, I think that a lot of the folks that we have on our investor list that we've talked to that own RVs and actually have experienced RVing in the last year or so are like, wow, I totally get it. There's a huge shortage of supply. Every single campground's fully occupied. Everyone's complaining about how there's not enough sites. I mean, there's there's a $14 billion backlog right now in new RV shipments right now with Door Motor Industries. And, 9% of America owns an RV, right? So there's so many like stats that, for people that are in this, they see it firsthand. There's like, wow, there really is a shortage here. There really is opportunity. It's more popular than ever, especially after COVID, just lit it all on fire. And I think that those folks see it, but for folks that are not, RVers, is I had never went RVing until I really started to explore this stuff. Since then I've, went to just, better understand the space and see how it works, put myself in their shoes.
Did you enjoy it?
Oh yeah, no, I think it's a great time. I definitely, I'm not like by nature a huge traveler. Like I kind of like stay in one place for most of the day to day. So I couldn't see myself being full timer, but I definitely think it's an awesome time. I love getting outside and seeing like great places by the water. So, absolutely. But as far as things go, like I think with this space, because of everything I just hit on with the different kind of like subsets of how it works and different variables, I think it just takes a little bit more education. And I think investors are generally still just needing to get kind of up to speed with how it works, understanding the different types, and having proven operators that are in this space as a whole. I find that a lot of investors, like I think from because I work with a lot of folks that are in the MHP space, they are gravitating towards the affordable housing type, right, of long-term leases, people there by more necessity, that type of thing. And we like that for the same reasons we like MHP. But I do think that the short-term stuff, there's an audience for that because you're able to see high cash on cash, high, mid-teens yields, again, with the potential to go higher. And you can't find that in most other places. So I think for the folks that are maybe either a little bit more understanding and in tune with the demand in the RV space, or that are just by nature a little bit more opportunistic, seeking higher yields, then those folks gravitate towards the short-term stuff that's doing, say, targeting 15% plus, cash on cash, whereas the folks that are more, say, risk averse want the really sticky revenue being at the at the core of everything. They'd rather take say like 10% more sure thing income stream, and they're not as excited about the incremental cash on cash with the additional added volatility.
Interesting. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And again, you mentioned that Class A, resort style. I mean, there's a lot of money in those, I can imagine. So I can definitely foresee some of those people becoming investors. So real quick, just want to touch on, you mentioned how short the supply is. Is development in the pipeline for you guys as well, potentially?
It definitely is. Land? Yeah, it definitely is. We just brought on a recent team member who's going to be helping us with these expansion opportunities that I spoke on, and development will definitely be something that we definitely anticipate that development will be something that follows as we get our team built and processes built. We've looked at a few pieces of land. So
cool. Love it. Awesome. Well, I appreciate the insight. Like I said, definitely not an asset class that, too many operators, of course, when you're in this space and, your social media and your circle is this space, it sounds like everybody's jumping,
totally. Yep.
Jumping to it, but ultimately really, people are just maybe talking about it here and there. But I really love it as a nice diversification play in the portfolio, as just something to kind of hedge against other things, like you mentioned with COVID, you have a lot of people kind of taking on that van life and that RV life, and it's removing them from, the renter space. And so you can kind of take advantage of some of those things. But as we wrap up here, I do have 5 questions I ask all of my guests. It's the final 5. First question, what's the best advice you've gotten from a mentor?
I would say slow down to speed up. I think just really like making sure that when you need to just having awareness of when you need to really slow down and build your foundation, get your systems right, and then launch full force.
Awesome. I love that. What is it about your career that makes you feel like you're fulfilling your why?
So I've always been motivated by growing, a platform that has people, involved, and I can create opportunities for other people, versus like, I know some people are motivated by saying, I don't want to have any employees. I want to do everything, kind of be like a lone wolf, but I've always been motivated to be able to like make a platform that impacts not only the residents or the campers we're serving, but also impacting just the people that are a part of it and growing something together.
Awesome. That's great. Favorite non-real estate or investment related book?
I would say the two books that come to mind would be, and I know you asked for one, but I'll just say the Alchemist. It was a personal development book read many, many years ago, and read it a few times now. I think was always a really neat sort of parable, and it isn't investing, but it's written by an investor. Principles by Ray Dalio is another one of the books that I've read numerous times over again that I really enjoy.
Awesome. Yeah. Haven't read any of Ray Dalio, but he's been mentioned a bunch, so I definitely need to put it on the list. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
That's a tough one for me, but I'd say fly, just because I think I like the adrenaline of it. I used to be a big snowboarder, kind of adrenaline guy back in the day, so I think we'd do something fun. So.
That's absolutely mine too. You got to choose flying.
Yeah,
cool. And what's the best way for people to get a hold of you and learn more?
So you can reach out to me. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Dylan Marma, Dylan Marma. And also you could send me an email, dylan@therequitygroup.com, or just plug in on our website and, get on our list if you want.
Perfect. We'll link that in the show notes. Dylan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. Listen, I know it's cliche and you hear it all the time, but please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you know when the next video is coming out. Even though this is technically a daily podcast, it's coming out the next day. We have a ton of content coming your way. So please like and subscribe. It helps a ton. Leave comments. Would love to know what you guys think. And we will see you on the next one. Thanks so much.